Her family gallery, her desperate, dying hope, was cruelly seized by ruthless enemies. She risked everything, sneaking into a dark auction, only to be caught by a cold-eyed stranger who snatched her secrets. He wasn't a mere man. He was the city's most feared mafia boss, and he didn't just reclaim her gallery. He claimed her body and soul. Now she's trapped in his opulent, dangerous world. Is this her brutal end or a twisted salvation? The scent of turpentine and forgotten dreams clung to Alara Vance, a bittersweet perfume she wore like a second skin. It seeped from her worn denim overalls, clung to the strands of chestnut hair perpetually escaping her messy bun, and settled deep in her lungs with every weary breath. Her studio, tucked away in the dusty rear of Vance Gallery, was less a sanctuary and more a silent battleground. Moonlight, filtered through grime-streaked panes, cast long, accusatory shadows across the canvases stacked against the walls, forgotten landscapes, solemn portraits, vibrant abstracts that now felt like relics from a brighter past. Each brushstroke she meticulously applied to the cracked varnish of an ancient still life felt like a futile attempt to breathe life back into something already gone. Despair was a cold, constant companion these days. It had settled in her bones after her father's passing, a slow, insidious poison that worked its way through every corner of her existence. The gallery, his legacy, her childhood haven, was suffocating under the weight of debt. Her fingers, usually nimble and precise, trembled slightly as she steadied a delicate palette knife. The silence of the studio was punctuated only by the soft scrape of metal on canvas and the relentless tick of the antique grandfather clock in the main hall, each chime a grim countdown to inevitable ruin. 3 months, Alara, her mother's voice tight with barely suppressed panic, echoed in her mind. The bank won't wait. We can't keep this up. Alara squeezed her eyes shut, a sharp pain blooming behind them. She knew. She saw the thinning walls, the peeling paint, the worn Persian rugs that once spoke of elegance but now whispered of decay. Every morning, the mail brought more stark white envelopes, final notices, eviction threats, legal papers with ominous red stamps. She was a gifted restorer, yes, her touch capable of coaxing vibrant life back into faded masterpieces, but the market for true artistry was a brutal beast, unforgiving to small, independent galleries fighting for survival. Her freelance work was a patchwork quilt of meager earnings, barely enough to keep the lights on in her tiny apartment above the gallery, let alone tackle the gaping maw of her father's medical bills and the gallery's burgeoning mortgage. She ran a hand over the smooth, cool surface of a marble bust, a stoic Roman emperor whose impassive gaze seemed to mock her crumbling world. How could she let this die? This place was more than just bricks and mortar. It was her father's heart, her mother's joy, her own nascent dreams. Every corner held a memory, the day her father first taught her to grind pigments, the exhilarating scent of new oil paints, the hushed reverence when a rare piece arrived. To lose it would be to lose a part of herself, a severance of the last tether to a family legacy she was, by blood and by love, sworn to protect. A sigh heavy with the weight of that responsibility escaped her. The desperation was a suffocating shroud, pressing in on all sides. She tried everything, online campaigns, community art classes, even selling off a few minor pieces from their dwindling private collection. But it was never enough. The abyss yawned wider with each passing day. Then a whisper of a rumor had reached her ears, carried on the clandestine currents of the art world, a private, exclusive auction hosted by a shadowy consortium, rumored to feature a lost masterpiece, an authentic Rubens hidden for decades. The mere mention of it made her stomach clench. These weren't legitimate circles. This was the underbelly, where art changed hands under dim lights, fueled by whispers of illicit wealth and unspoken deals. It was dangerous. Her father, with his unwavering ethics, would have been appalled. But what choice did she have? The alternative was the cold, sterile reality of foreclosure, the Vance Gallery reduced to dust. This was a Hail Mary, a desperate throw of the dice when the game was already all but lost. If she could somehow get a glimpse, confirm its authenticity, perhaps even track its provenance, it might be enough to leverage some attention, find a legitimate buyer, or at the very least, understand the ruthless players she was up against. It was a flickering hope, fragile as the ancient canvas beneath her hands, but it was all she had left. The decision had gnawed at her for days, a bitter pill she finally swallowed with a grim resolve. Tonight was the night. She stripped off her overalls, the familiar scent of oil paint and solvent clinging to her. Her reflection in the cracked mirror above the sink showed a woman teetering on the edge, dark circles under eyes that usually sparkled with artistic passion, now haunted by exhaustion and fear. She splashed cold water on her face, The icy shock a temporary reprieve from the gnawing dread. She pulled on a simple, dark dress, an old, unremarkable piece of charcoal gray fabric that would hopefully allow her to blend into the opulent shadows. Her worn boots felt strangely heavy on her feet. Leaving the studio, she locked the door with a click that echoed too loudly in the silence of the empty gallery. The grand hall, usually vibrant with hushed conversations and admiring glances, felt hollow, mournful. Dust motes danced in the slivers of street light piercing the heavy velvet curtains, illuminating ghost-like forms of empty pedestals. It was a tomb, waiting for its final interment. A devastating thought. The city outside was a symphony of blaring horns and distant sirens, a harsh reminder of the bustling, indifferent world that cared little for a failing art gallery or the desperate woman trying to save it. The autumn air bit at her exposed skin, carrying the metallic tang of rain on asphalt. She clutched her small, nondescript messenger bag closer, her hand instinctively checking for the small notebook and pen nestled inside, her only weapons in this uncharted territory. The address she'd painstakingly acquired led her to a discreet, unmarked building on the outskirts of the financial district. It was an anomaly among the towering glass facades, an old limestone structure with heavy, ornate doors that looked more like a private club than an auction house. A single, almost imperceptible camera blinked above the entrance, its red eye a silent warning. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silent alarm bells screaming in her mind. This was madness. This was suicide. But then she pictured the for sale sign, the eviction notice, the look of quiet defeat in her mother's eyes. She pushed open the heavy door, a faint chime announcing her unwelcome arrival. The air inside hit her like a thick, expensive blanket, a heady mixture of aged leather, rare wood, and a faint, cloying sweetness of expensive cigars. The soft glow of strategically placed lighting revealed an interior dripping with wealth and secrecy, velvet ropes, hushed voices, and men in tailored suits whose eyes seemed to miss nothing. Alara felt utterly, irrevocably out of place, a fragile moth drawn to a dangerous flame. She was a girl fighting to save her family's art in a world where art was just another commodity, another pawn in a game far beyond her comprehension. She tightened her grip on her bag, her breath hitching slightly. This was it, her last chance. Or perhaps her first step into the abyss. The thick, cloying scent of aged brandy and expensive cigars intensified as Alara navigated the labyrinthine corridors of the private auction. Velvet ropes, surprisingly frayed at the edges despite the opulence, guided guests towards a main exhibition hall, but Alara veered off, seeking a less conspicuous route. She moved like a phantom, her dark dress a meager camouflage against the deep crimson and gold wallpaper. Her boots, usually loud, seemed to absorb the opulent quiet, each step barely a whisper on the thick plush carpet. Her heart, however, hammered against her ribs, a frantic rhythm that threatened to betray her. The main hall buzzed with a low, predatory murmur. Diamond cufflinks glinted under the spotlights, reflecting off polished marble floors. A genuine Rubens, rumored to be on display, was her true target. Not to buy, but to observe, to verify. If this legendary piece truly existed, and if she could glean any real information, it might just be the miracle her gallery desperately needed. She found a secluded alcove, partially hidden behind a towering antique Chinese screen, its silk panels embroidered with intricate dragons that seemed to writhe in the dim light. From here, she had a clear, albeit oblique view of a smaller, more private antechamber where a particularly controversial piece of a Caravaggio, if rumors were to be believed, with a murky provenance was being examined by a small, exclusive group. This was where the real deals were cut, away from prying eyes. Her breath hitched. Among the hushed figures, she recognized a silhouette, unmistakable even from a distance. Silas Thorne. His voice a smooth, oily baritone she knew all too well from his persistent, condescending offers for her gallery, drifted through the thin wall, laced with an unsettling undertone. The target is secured, Thorne murmured, his voice closer now, as if he had stepped into the alcove adjacent to hers. The air grew cold, menacing. The Vance Gallery. Its legacy, a convenient front. We'll acquire it by force, if necessary. The family they'll break. Alara's blood ran cold. The Vance Gallery. Her gallery. Her family. Not just the rumored Rubens, but her life, her heritage, was part of their twisted conversation. This wasn't just about art. It was about outright hostile takeover, about crushing her family into dust. The audacity, the casual cruelty of it, made a wave of nausea sweep over her. The old woman poses no threat, another voice gravely responded. But the girl, Alara Vance, she's observant, too passionate for her own good. She clings to that decrepit place like a limpet to a rock. Thorne chuckled, a dry, humorless sound that scraped against Alara's nerves. Then we simply pry her off. Permanently, if need be. The acquisition must be clean, untraceable. And the artifact, it belongs to our collection. A primal fear, raw and potent, seized Alara. Her hands trembled so violently she almost dropped her small notebook. She needed to write this down, every word. Her pencil hovered over the page, her heart thundering in her ears. This was proof. Proof of Thorne's insidious plans. She leaned in closer, straining to catch every syllable, every menacing implication. And then it happened. A tiny, almost imperceptible sound. Her worn boot, nudging a loose floorboard. The faintest creak. Silence. The low hum of conversation from Thorne's side of the wall vanished. The air grew heavy, thick with unseen tension. Alara froze, every muscle rigid, her breath caught in her throat. She closed her eyes, wishing she could simply melt into the shadows, become invisible. What was that? A voice, deep and resonant, cut through the sudden quiet. It wasn't Thorne. This voice was different. Calmer, yet infinitely more dangerous. It vibrated with an authority that wasn't merely suggested, but absolute. Alara's eyes snapped open. A figure emerged from the adjacent alcove, stepping into the soft, indirect light. He was tall, impossibly so, and his tailored suit, a dark, immaculate charcoal, seemed to absorb the light, making him a shadow made flesh. His broad shoulders filled the narrow space, an imposing, almost predatory presence. His hair was dark, slicked back from a high forehead, and his features were sharp, chiseled, framed by an intensity that bordered on lethal. But it was his eyes that seized her. They were a startling, icy blue, piercing through the dimness, locking onto her with unnerving precision. They saw everything, missed nothing. She felt utterly exposed, as if he could peel back her skin and read the frantic thoughts racing through her mind. This was no ordinary man. This was the predator Thorne had merely been serving. This was Dante Volkov, the mafia boss. He took a slow, deliberate step towards her, and the distance between them seemed to shrink with terrifying speed. She could smell him now, expensive, bespoke cologne, an undertone of something wild, untamed. It was intoxicating and terrifying. "And what might you have found, little bird?" he murmured, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "Where you shouldn't have been looking?" Alara's mind raced, a frantic scramble for a coherent lie. I'm sorry," she stammered, her voice a reedy whisper. "I think I took a wrong turn. I'm just a misplaced guest." Her hands, still clutching the notebook like a lifeline, trembled visibly. Dante's gaze flickered to the notebook, then back to her eyes. A faint, almost imperceptible smirk touched his lips, chilling her to the bone. He knew. He knew she was lying. He took another step, closer still, until his presence was a suffocating weight. His shadow enveloped her, blotting out the ambient light. He extended a hand, not to help, but to demand. His fingers, long and elegant, with a subtle, dangerous power, were adorned with a single heavy signet ring that gleamed with dark, ancient gold. "Your notebook," he said, his voice a silken command. "Give it to me." Her grip tightened instinctively, a futile act of defiance. Every fiber of her being screamed to run, to hide, to simply vanish. But his gaze held her captive, a terrifying, mesmerizing pull. He didn't raise his voice, didn't make a sudden move, but the sheer force of his will was overwhelming. He wasn't asking. He was taking. Slowly, reluctantly, her fingers uncurled. He took the notebook, his knuckles brushing hers. The brief contact sent a jolt, an unexpected current through her arm. It wasn't unpleasant, but it was electric, utterly unnerving. His eyes, still fixed on hers, seemed to probe the deepest corners of her soul. She felt stripped bare, completely, utterly seen by this dangerous man. He flipped through the pages of her notebook, his expression unreadable. Her meticulous sketches of art, her hastily jotted notes about the gallery's dwindling finances, and finally, the blank page where she had intended to transcribe Thorne's menacing words. His gaze lingered there for a moment too long. Then he closed the notebook with a soft, decisive snap. He tucked it inside his own jacket, a proprietary gesture that stole her breath. You, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, yet somehow resonating through her very core, have stumbled into something far beyond your understanding, little bird. You now possess dangerous knowledge. And that, his eyes narrowed, a cold fire glinting within them, makes you mine to protect, or to contain. The warning was clear, unambiguous, and terrifying. She wasn't just a witness. She was now a part of his world, whether she wanted to be or not. He had claimed her without a single touch, without a single direct threat, simply by his potent, undeniable presence. He turned, his dark form receding back into the shadows from which he had emerged, leaving Alara trembling, utterly alone, in the suffocating silence. Her gallery, her life, her very existence had just collided with an unstoppable force. And she knew with a chilling certainty that nothing would ever be the same. The hunt had begun, and she, the unwitting prey, had just been marked by the most dangerous hunter of all. The chilling silence that followed Dante Volkov's departure at the auction was a deceptive calm. It was the prelude to a storm, a quiet before the devastating torrent. Within hours of her fateful encounter, the whispers about the Vance Gallery intensified, curdling into an ugly public spectacle. Anonymous tips to local newspapers painted Alara's family business as a haven for forged art, a front for questionable dealings. The few remaining patrons, once loyal, now eyed her with suspicion, their visits dwindling to a trickle. Then came Silas Thorne's open assault. Not just veiled threats anymore. The first morning, she found a splash of lurid red paint defiling the pristine white facade of her gallery, mimicking blood. The next, a brick through the display window, narrowly missing her prized, yet unsaleable antique clock. The police, when called, offered only weary shrugs. Vandalism, Miss Vance, happens all the time in this neighborhood. They didn't see the specific, targeted malice, the message carved into the very air she breathed. They didn't understand that this was a declaration of war. Alara fought back with a desperation bordering on madness. She meticulously documented every incident, every threatening letter that slipped under the gallery door, scrawled with crude, menacing caricatures of her family. She consulted lawyers, their faces grim as they reviewed the fabricated liens and murky contracts Thorne was suddenly producing, challenging her ownership, questioning her father's solvency. Each legal avenue she explored dead-ended, blocked by Thorne's unseen influence, his web of corruption far more intricate than she could have imagined. She even tried digging into Thorne's past, searching online databases for any weakness, any illicit deal she could expose, but his digital footprint was as meticulously scrubbed as his public persona was polished. She was utterly outmatched, her small, trembling hands against the might of a truly ruthless adversary. Sleep became a luxury she couldn't afford. The smell of old paper and dust in the gallery, once comforting, now felt like the lingering scent of a corpse. Every creak of the old floorboards, every shadow dancing in her peripheral vision, sent shivers of terror down her spine. The despair that had been a silent companion now roared in her ears, threatening to consume her whole. She was a solitary figure, trapped in a crumbling fortress, watching as the walls steadily gave way. Then the anomalies began. Small, almost imperceptible shifts in the relentless tide against her. A particularly aggressive debt collector, who had been hounding her daily, suddenly went silent. A particularly damning article about her gallery, scheduled for the city's largest newspaper, mysteriously vanished from the editorial calendar. One evening, after she'd spent hours patching the shattered display window with cheap plywood, she noticed a sleek, dark sedan parked discreetly across the street, its occupants shadowy figures, always watching. They weren't Thorne's men. His thugs were loud and subtle. These men moved with a silent, almost elegant precision, like sentinels guarding a precious, if unwilling, asset. A small, anonymous payment appeared in the gallery's long-dormant bank account, just enough to stave off an immediate utility cutoff, a gesture so precise, so timely, it chilled her more than any threat. It was a lifeline, yes, but one extended by an invisible, powerful hand. She knew whose hand it was. Dante Volkov, the man who had taken her notebook, who had marked her as his. The realization brought a strange cocktail of relief and profound unease. She was being helped, but at what cost? The answer arrived on a Tuesday, just as Alara was meticulously reshelving dusty art history books, her fingers numb with exhaustion. The chime of the gallery door, usually a welcome sound, now felt ominous. She looked up, her heart leaping into her throat. Dante Volkov stood there, framed by the late afternoon light, a vision of controlled power. His charcoal suit was immaculate, the fabric falling without a single crease. His icy blue eyes swept across the cavernous, wounded gallery, taking in the plywood patch, the faded grandeur, the underlying despair. He wasn't smiling. He rarely seemed to. But there was no overt threat in his posture, no menacing entourage. He was alone, yet his presence filled the entire space, suffocating her with its quiet intensity. Alara Vance, he stated, his voice a low, smooth rumble that reverberated through the quiet space. He didn't ask if she was busy. He simply commanded attention. She straightened, her spine stiffening in an automatic act of defiance, though her knees felt weak. Mr. Volkov, she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. To what do I owe this a visit? He took a step deeper into the gallery, his gaze lingering on a framed photograph of her father, a warm, smiling man whose artistic vision had been the gallery's heart. Your gallery is dying, he observed, a blunt statement of fact that stung. Silas Thorne is an opportunistic hyena. He will pick it clean, then use it for his own, less savory enterprises. Alara bristled, resentment flaring. I am aware, thank you. I'm doing everything I can. His eyes, cold and unwavering, met hers. And you are failing. The brutal honesty stripped away her last shred of pride. It was true. She was failing. But there is an alternative. He moved further into the hall, stopping before a particularly neglected portrait, its colors dulled by time and improper care. His fingers, long and elegant, traced the faded outline of the frame. I require an art consultant. Someone with an eye for authenticity, a deep understanding of provenance, and an unwavering loyalty to their employer. He finally looked at her again, his gaze piercing. Someone who would safeguard my interests as fiercely as you fight for this ghost of a gallery. Alara stared, her mind struggling to process his words. You want to hire me? The absurdity of it made a hollow laugh escape her lips. To advise a man like you? On art. On my art, he corrected smoothly, his tone leaving no room for argument. And on other acquisitions. I will clear every debt this gallery owes. I will restore it to its former glory and beyond. I will ensure Silas Thorne never darkens your doorstep again, or breathes another threat against you or your family. You will have security, resources, the freedom to pursue your passion without the crushing weight of ruin. It was everything she had ever dreamed of, laid out before her like a shimmering oasis in her desert of despair. Salvation, a dizzying, intoxicating promise. But then came the trap, the glint of the golden bars. In return, Dante continued, his voice dropping to a low, possessive register that sent a shiver down her spine. You will live under my protection. You will work exclusively for me. You will become part of my world. And you, his eyes locked onto hers, burning with an undeniable claim, will belong to me. Alara felt the air leave her lungs. It wasn't a question. It was a declaration. A demand. He was offering her everything, but asking for everything in return. Her independence, her autonomy, her very self. The golden cage shimmered before her, beautiful and terrifying. The choice was clear. Embrace the terrifying safety of his ownership or face certain agonizing ruin. Her throat tightened. She hated him for it. Hated the way he so casually stripped her of choice. Hated the icy certainty in his eyes. But underneath the resentment, a desperate, undeniable truth began to assert itself. He was her only way out. He was the only one powerful enough to save her. And deep down, in a corner of her soul she refused to acknowledge, there was a reluctant fascination with this dangerous, compelling man who had just offered her a devil's bargain. What's your answer, Alara? He asked, his voice soft, yet vibrating with an unspoken ultimatum. Will you accept my protection? My claim. She closed her eyes, picturing her gallery, reduced to rubble. Her mother's heartbroken face. Then Dante's unwavering gaze, the promise of safety, the intoxicating allure of power. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that refusing him meant certain doom. And perhaps a part of her, weary of fighting alone, yearned for the formidable strength he offered. She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. I accept. Her voice was barely a whisper, a tremor running through her. The words tasted of ash and reluctant surrender. A faint, almost imperceptible satisfaction flickered in his eyes. It wasn't a smile, not truly. It was something far more dangerous. Good, he simply said. Welcome to my world, Alara. And remember, in my world, there is no turning back. He turned, walking towards the door, his silhouette an imposing figure against the fading light. My car will be here at dawn. Pack what you need. You're moving in with me. Alara stood amidst the echoing silence of her dying gallery, a prisoner newly freed, yet already bound. The golden cage had just snapped shut. The dawn Alara arrived at Dante Volkov's sprawling penthouse was not the gentle, hopeful sunrise she usually associated with new beginnings. It was a cold, indifferent ascent, painting the Manhattan skyline in hues of bruised purple and gray, much like the churning emotions within her. She stepped out of the sleek, black car, its engine a silent purr, feeling like a captive being delivered to her gilded prison. Two hulking men in dark suits, indistinguishable from the shadows they cast, flanked her without a word, guiding her through a private entrance. The air was crisp, but Alara felt a suffocating pressure building in her chest. Dante's penthouse was a monument to understated power. Polished marble floors gleamed under the soft glow of recessed lighting, reflecting abstract art pieces that whispered of illicit origins. The scent of exotic wood and expensive leather hung heavy, a stark contrast to the familiar turpentine and dust of her gallery. Everywhere, there was an immaculate order, a chilling precision. It was a world entirely antithetical to her own chaotic, vibrant existence, a place where everything, including her, seemed to have its designated, controlled space. Her assigned studio was a marvel, a vast room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, equipped with every conceivable tool, every pigment, every brush she could ever dream of. It was a dream come true, a craftsman's paradise. Yet, the price of this freedom was her own. A silent, ever-present guard stood by the door, his gaze unblinking. The implicit message was clear. She could create, but she could not leave. Days bled into a week, then two, each one a relentless battle against her burgeoning resentment and a terrifying, unwanted curiosity. Alara found herself living under a microscope. Dante rarely appeared during the day, consumed by his invisible empire, but his presence was a constant, palpable force. His guards, silent and efficient, materialized whenever she moved beyond her designated areas, to the gourmet kitchen for coffee, to the sprawling library filled with rare leather-bound tomes. Every meal was a lavish affair, served by a discreet housekeeper, yet Alara ate alone, feeling the weight of unseen eyes. "He's testing me," she muttered to herself one afternoon, meticulously applying a fine layer of protective varnish to a Renaissance-era miniature she'd started restoring. The delicate scent of the varnish, usually soothing, now felt like another layer of constraint. Seeing how well I fit into his cage, her resentment was a thorny bush, growing thicker with each passing day. She missed the freedom of her own small life, the honest struggle, even the dust. Yet she couldn't deny the bizarre sense of security. Thorne's threats had vanished like smoke. Her gallery, she learned from brief, tightly monitored phone calls to her mother, was indeed being meticulously restored, debts cleared. The devil had kept his end of the bargain. It was during their infrequent dinners that Dante truly emerged from his shadows. He sat at the head of a massive darkwood table, a solitary king in his castle. His gaze was often fixed on her, assessing, probing, making her skin prickle with an uncomfortable awareness. He asked precise, unnervingly insightful questions about her work, her techniques, the history of art. He didn't just collect art. He understood it with a depth that surprised her. The subtle brushwork of Caravaggio, he mused one evening, swirling a glass of dark red wine, his voice a low melodic rumble that sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. It speaks of the human condition, the raw truth beneath the veneer. A dangerous artist. Alara, surprised by his depth, found herself responding despite her internal resistance. Dangerous, yes, but honest. He didn't shy away from the shadows, because he knew light couldn't exist without them. Their eyes met across the vast table, and for a fleeting moment, the air crackled. It was a shared understanding, a spark of connection over a common passion, utterly out of place in their dynamic. Her heart thumped a nervous rhythm. He would sometimes visit her studio, unannounced, a silent wraith appearing in the doorway. He never touched her tools, never disturbed her work, but he would stand for long minutes, watching her, his presence a heavy, distracting weight. One afternoon, while she was painstakingly recreating a lost fragment of an ancient manuscript, her hand faltered. A drop of ink threatened to ruin hours of work. Before she could panic, Dante's long fingers, surprisingly gentle, reached out. He took the fine brush from her trembling hand, his knuckles brushing hers. The fleeting contact sent a jolt, a sudden, unwanted warmth through her. His gaze was intense, focused, not on her, but on the delicate parchment. With a steady hand, he dipped the brush into the ink, and with a precision that mirrored her own, made a tiny, almost imperceptible correction to the intricate calligraphy. He didn't look at her, but the unspoken message was clear. I see your struggle. I can help. Focus, he murmured, his voice close, his breath warm against her ear. Your work demands it. He handed the brush back, his touch lingering for a fraction of a second too long. Alara's breath hitched. A rush of something akin to gratitude, mixed with profound discomfort, washed over her. It was a tantalizing glimpse behind the veil of his ruthless persona, a man capable of such delicate precision, such unexpected tenderness. This wasn't just a mafia boss. He was a paradox, a walking contradiction that ignited a dangerous, unwanted curiosity within her. He often had calls, hushed conversations in a language she didn't understand, the cadence sharp and demanding. Sometimes, she would hear the muffled sounds of heated arguments from his private office, doors slamming, then a chilling silence. Those moments reminded her starkly of the true nature of his world, the ruthlessness that underpinned his calm demeanor. The golden cage, however comfortable, was still very much a cage, and its bars were forged from danger and power. One evening, after another tense, silent dinner, Alara found herself drawn to the library. She sought solace in the familiar scent of old books. As she browsed a shelf of antique maps, her fingers brushed against a hidden catch. A secret panel slid open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside, nestled among dusty documents and a collection of ancient coins, was a small, ornate dagger. Its hilt was intricately carved, steeped in history, but its blade was lethally sharp, clearly meant for a purpose far more sinister than display. She picked it up, the cold metal heavy in her hand. It felt ancient, dangerous, whispering of violence and unspoken secrets. This was not a piece of art to be admired. It was a tool, a weapon. It was a stark, undeniable reminder of Dante's true identity, the darker currents that ran beneath the surface of his cultured facade. The glimmering chemistry, the shared passion for art, felt like a cruel deception in the face of this tangible danger. A sudden click echoed from the doorway. Alara spun around, the dagger clutched tight in her hand, her heart leaping into her throat. Dante stood there, his eyes, those terrifyingly intelligent blue eyes, fixed not on the weapon, but on her face, a silent, unreadable storm brewing within them. What have you found, little bird? He asked, his voice low, devoid of emotion, yet radiating an undeniable menace. The quiet hum of the penthouse suddenly felt like a premonition. This was his world, and she had just trespassed into its deepest, most dangerous secret. The ornate dagger, cold and ancient in her palm, felt like a silent confession. Alara stood frozen in the library, the scent of old paper and danger suddenly thick in the air. Dante Volkov's eyes, those arctic blue depths, held hers captive, revealing nothing yet demanding everything. The question hung unspoken. What do you know about my secrets? Then a flicker. A subtle shift in his gaze. He didn't accuse, didn't threaten. He simply reached out, his fingers, long and controlled, closing over hers. Gently, yet with an undeniable authority, he disarmed her, taking the dagger. The cold metal left a ghostly imprint on her skin. That, he said, his voice a low rumble, is not for display, or for curiosity. He slipped the dagger back into its hidden compartment, the panel clicking shut with a finality that echoed in the silent room. Some things are best left undisturbed, Alara. Especially in my world. The moment passed, leaving a brittle tension in its wake. He had seen her, caught her in an act of transgression, yet he had not punished her. The implicit message was clear. He was in control, always. The curiosity that had bloomed in her during their strange, quiet meals now mingled with a profound sense of unease. He was a man of unfathomable depths, and she had barely scratched the surface. The next morning began like any other in her golden cage, a lavish breakfast she barely touched, the constant, silent presence of a guard outside her studio. She was attempting to lose herself in the intricate floral patterns of a faded tapestry, the rhythmic motion of her needle a fragile balm against her anxieties. But a sharp, insistent buzz from the secure phone on her desk, reserved for approved outside contact, shattered the fragile peace. It was her mother. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. Her mother never called her on this line unless it was truly urgent. She snatched the receiver, her fingers trembling. "Mom? What's wrong?" Her mother's voice was thin, reedy, laced with barely contained panic. "Alara, it's the gallery. They destroyed the new exhibit. The contemporary pieces. Smashed, spray-painted. It's a total loss." A choked sob escaped her mother's lips. "And Mr. Henderson, the old security guard, he's gone. Vanished." Alara felt the blood drain from her face. Her vision swam. Destroyed? Mr. Henderson gone. This wasn't just vandalism. This was a brutal, insidious attack, a clear escalation. And the disappearance of Mr. Henderson, a kind elderly man who had worked for her father for decades, sent a cold spike of terror through her. Silas Thorne. It had to be him. He was making good on his threats, reaching beyond her, hurting those she cared for. "I'm coming," Alara blurted, already pushing back her chair, her body screaming to rush to her mother's side, to the shattered remnants of her gallery. The raw, visceral instinct to protect what was left of her life, to fight for those she loved, surged through her. But a silent hand, firm and unyielding, stopped her. Dante's head enforcer, a hulking man named Costas, stood in the doorway, his expression impassive. "Ms. Vance, Mr. Volkov requests your presence in his office." His tone was polite, yet utterly unyielding. There was no argument to be had. She was a bird in a cage, and even in crisis, she flew only where her owner permitted. Resentment flared, hot and bitter. Her own world was crumbling, and she was being summoned like a subordinate. But the fear for her mother, for Mr. Henderson, for her gallery, overshadowed everything else. She swallowed hard, her jaw tight, and followed Costas, her boots clicking loudly on the polished marble, a sharp, dissonant sound in this silent fortress. Dante's office was a vast expanse of dark wood and glass, overlooking the sprawling city like a titan's eyrie. He sat behind an imposing desk, his back to the panoramic window, the city a glittering, indifferent backdrop. He wasn't on the phone, wasn't barking orders. He was simply waiting. His stillness was almost more terrifying than any outburst. "My mother just called," Alara said, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to control it. "The gallery. Mr. Henderson. Thorne is escalating. I need to go there. Now." Dante finally turned, his gaze meeting hers. There was no surprise in his eyes, no overt emotion. Just that familiar, piercing intelligence. "I am aware." His voice was low, devoid of inflection. "Aware." Alara felt a surge of frustrated fury. "And you're just sitting here. My gallery is being destroyed. An innocent man is missing." A flicker of something, not anger, but a cold, savage resolve, passed through his eyes. "Do you believe I am ignorant of the machinations of Silas Thorne?" he asked, his voice soft, almost a whisper, yet it cut through her like a blade. "Did you truly think your pathetic attempts to fight him go unnoticed? Or that I would allow my property, or those under my protection, to remain undefended?" Alara flinched. His property. The word stung, a harsh reminder of her purchased freedom. But his next words, though chilling, brought an unexpected sliver of cold relief. "Costas," Dante said without taking his eyes off Alara, "the details." Costas, who had been standing by the door like a silent sentinel, spoke. His voice was flat, efficient. "Two of Thorne's men were apprehended at the gallery. The damage a cosmetic. Quickly contained. Mr. Henderson was found, unharmed, a few blocks away. He was persuaded to take a short, unexpected vacation." Alara gasped, a wave of profound relief washing over her, quickly followed by a sickening jolt of understanding. Persuaded. The word hung in the air, loaded with unspoken violence. It wasn't a gentle suggestion. It was a mafia boss's quiet, ruthless intervention. "And Thorne?" Alara asked, her voice barely audible. Dante finally rose, slowly, deliberately. His movements were fluid, predatory. He walked around a desk, stopping a few feet from her, his presence utterly dominating. "Silas Thorne," he said, his voice laced with an icy edge, "will find his supply lines inexplicably severed. His partners will become uncooperative. His legitimate businesses will face a sudden, catastrophic audit, and his illicit art collection will begin to disappear, piece by piece, into the hands of anonymous buyers. He will be bled dry, slowly, painfully. His entire empire will crumble, brick by brick, before he ever knows who truly orchestrated his demise. Alara stared at him, her heart thumping a frantic rhythm. It was a declaration, a brutal promise of unseen retribution. There had been no grand spectacle, no direct confrontation, just the invisible hand of a man who moved mountains through whispers and unseen force. The awe was chilling, terrifying. She was safe. Her mother was safe. Her gallery was safe. But the cost was immense. She had traded one fear for another, the fear of ruin for the profound, unsettling fear of the man who now owned her very safety. Dante reached out, his hand gently cupping her chin, tilting her face up to meet his intense gaze. His touch, so unexpected, so tender, was a stark contrast to the ruthless words he had just spoken. "You see, little bird," he murmured, his thumb brushing lightly across her jawline. "In my world, threats are handled. Swiftly, brutally. And you," his eyes darkened, becoming pools of possessive fire, "are now my responsibility. And no one touches what is mine." A shiver ran through Alara, a complex mix of terror, gratitude, and a dangerous, unwanted spark of attraction. She was protected, absolutely. But she was also irrevocably bound, trapped in a golden cage woven from the ruthless power of a man who saw her not just as an artist, but as his prized possession. The question lingered, an ominous echo in her mind. What new horrors would his protection bring? The days that followed Thorne's quiet, devastating downfall settled into a new, unsettling rhythm. Alara's gallery was safe, undeniably thriving under the mysterious surge of funds and high-end security. Her mother, shaken but relieved, spoke of a guardian angel who had miraculously intervened. Alara knew better. Her guardian angel had eyes like ice and a soul forged in shadows, and he held her captive in a fortress of marble and glass. Yet, with the immediate threat vanquished, the suffocating resentment Alara felt towards Dante began to intertwine with a profound, almost terrifying sense of obligation. She was safe, yes, but her freedom felt more like a meticulously crafted illusion. The guards, always present, never intrusive, were a constant reminder of her gilded cage. She poured herself into her work, losing hours in the intricate dance of brush and canvas, finding a fragile solace in the familiar scent of linseed oil and gesso. It was in these quiet moments, surrounded by the beauty she was sworn to protect, that the unwanted curiosity about Dante would stir. He had shown her a glimpse of ruthless efficiency, but what lay beneath the impenetrable facade? One blustery afternoon, a sudden downpour trapped Alara in the sprawling library, its towering shelves filled with rare, leather-bound volumes that smelled of ancient paper and intellect. She was searching for a specific art history text, a distraction from the dull ache in her chest that was neither fear nor anger, but something far more complex. Her fingers brushed against an old, ornate globe in a dimly lit corner. It spun with an unexpected ease, revealing a cleverly concealed latch on its base. Curiosity, an impulse she usually embraced, warred with the memory of the hidden dagger and Dante's chilling warning. But the magnetic pull of the unknown was too strong. With a hesitant touch, she pressed the latch. A section of the bookshelf, silent as a phantom, receded inward, revealing a narrow, darkened passage. The air within was cooler, thicker, carrying a faint, poignant scent of cedar and something else, something almost metallic, like dried tears and old sorrow. This wasn't a utility closet. This was a private vault. Her heart thudded against her ribs, a frantic hummingbird trapped within her chest. Danger. Retreat. But her feet, as if guided by an unseen force, carried her forward. The passage led to a small, circular room, devoid of the penthouse's usual opulence. It was stark, almost ascetic, with a single spotlight illuminating the center. And there it was. Not a priceless artifact, not a weapon, but a painting. It was an oil portrait, old and badly damaged. The canvas was marred by a deep, jagged tear running vertically through the center, as if slashed by a cruel blade. The colors were faded, the edges frayed, and neglect had caused the paint to crack and peel in places. Yet, even in its ruined state, the subject's haunting beauty was undeniable. A young woman, perhaps in her late teens or early 20s, with Alara's own chestnut hair and strikingly similar, deep-set, intelligent eyes. There was a fragile vulnerability in her painted gaze, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips, yet beneath it, a strength that defied the damage. Alara, the restorer, immediately saw the profound, irreparable damage, but also the meticulous artistry, the love poured into every brushstroke. This wasn't just a painting. It was a memory, a heartbreak, meticulously preserved yet deliberately hidden. A deep ache resonated within her own chest, an echo of the silent grief radiating from the canvas. Who was she? And what devastating story did that jagged tear tell? A soft click, and the hidden door to the passage closed behind her, plunging the small room into deeper shadow. Alara spun, her breath catching in her throat. Dante Volkov stood in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the faint light filtering from the library. His face was a mask of granite, his eyes, usually cold and unreadable, now held a raw, primal intensity that sent a shiver through her. He wasn't angry, not precisely. He was exposed, vulnerable in a way she had never witnessed before. "You found it," he said, his voice low, rough, like gravel scraping against stone. It wasn't a question. Alara's own voice was a whisper. Who is she? She gestured to the painting, her heart aching with a shared, unspoken sorrow. Dante stepped fully into the room, the door closing again with a soft thud. He walked towards the painting, his gaze fixed on it, a profound sadness etched into the sharp lines of his face. He stopped inches from the canvas, his hand reaching out, hovering just above the ragged tear, as if afraid to touch the wound. "My sister," he finally said, the words heavy with unspoken grief. "Isabella." She was everything. Alara's breath hitched. Sister. The word, so mundane, yet so freighted with meaning, struck her deeply. She remembered her own father, the gaping void his loss had left. "What happened?" she asked, her voice soft, empathetic. He finally tore his gaze from the painting, his eyes meeting hers. They were dark, stormy, revealing a depth of pain she hadn't thought him capable of. "Betrayal," he ground out, the word laced with bitter venom. She was caught in the crossfire of a war that wasn't hers. A war I was supposed to protect her from. His hand clenched into a tight fist at his side. The tear, it was done by a rival. A message. A brutal, agonizing message. Alara felt a wave of profound empathy wash over her. She saw not the ruthless mafia boss, but a man haunted by loss, consumed by a grief he had buried beneath layers of power and control. It resonated with her own pain, the heavy burden of her father's death and the gallery's impending doom. "Ah, I know what it's like to lose someone you love because of a world you didn't choose," Alara confessed, her voice thick with emotion. She found herself speaking of her father, of his quiet passion for art, of his sudden illness and the crushing debts that followed. She spoke of her desperate, futile struggle to save his legacy, the feeling of being utterly alone against an insurmountable tide. Dante listened in silence, his expression softening imperceptibly. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer platitudes. He simply listened, his intense gaze fixed on her, absorbing every word, every tremor in her voice. When she finished, a fragile silence settled between them, broken only by the distant hum of the penthouse's ventilation. "Your father," Dante said, his voice a low rumble, "he built something beautiful. And you fight for it with the ferocity of a lioness." A strange, almost reluctant respect flickered in his eyes. Isabella, she loved beauty too. She would have loved your gallery. The words, simple yet heartfelt, forged an unexpected link. It wasn't about ownership anymore, not purely. It was about shared wounds, about the brutal unfairness of loss, and the relentless human need to preserve something, anything, from the ashes of devastation. Alara felt a profound shift within her. She still resented his control, the golden cage he'd built around her, but she also saw the man beneath the armor, a man capable of such deep love and such profound pain. "I'm an art restorer," Alara said, her voice gaining a quiet strength. "I can't bring her back, but I could. I could try to restore the painting, to heal the wound, at least on the canvas." The offer was impulsive, driven by an empathy she couldn't suppress. Dante's eyes, which had held such sorrow, suddenly sharpened, a flicker of something almost akin to hope mingled with profound suspicion. "No one has touched it since." "I know," she replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "But leaving it like this, it's a constant reminder of the wound. Sometimes to move forward, you have to try to mend what you can." He studied her, his gaze intense, piercing, as if trying to discern every hidden motive. The air crackled with a delicate micro-tension, a silent battle between his ingrained distrust and a dawning, terrifying vulnerability. After a long, agonizing moment, he finally gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. "Very well," he said, his voice still low, but softer now, tinged with a reluctant trust. but you work on it only when I am present. And with the utmost care, Alara. This is not just paint and canvas. It is a piece of my soul. Alara's heart thrummed with a confusing mix of fear, triumph, and a burgeoning sense of connection. She had just gained access to the deepest, most guarded part of him. And in doing so, she knew irrevocably that their worlds had just become even more dangerously intertwined. This wasn't merely a business arrangement or a forced protection anymore. This was something far more profound, far more perilous. The invisible threads binding them had just tightened, weaving a tapestry of shared loss and a dangerous, undeniable intimacy. The lines between captor and captive, protector and protected, had blurred beyond recognition. The Isabella portrait, once a stark reminder of Dante's impenetrable grief, had become a fragile bridge between them. Alara had spent weeks in the vault, meticulously, painstakingly restoring the canvas, her every brushstroke a quiet act of empathy. Dante, true to his word, was always present, a silent, watchful shadow. During those hours, surrounded by the scent of old paint and shared vulnerability, the harsh edges of their enforced relationship began to soften. She saw the subtle flickers of emotion in his eyes as Isabella's youthful vibrancy slowly re-emerged from the damaged paint. He, in turn, watched her work with an intensity that made her skin tingle, a profound respect for her skill that transcended their perilous dynamic. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was a fragile, undeniable connection, forged in the quiet intimacy of shared sorrow. She looks almost real, Dante had murmured just yesterday, his voice rough with emotion, as Alara applied the final, delicate strokes to a section of Isabella's hair. For the first time, she had seen the raw grief of a brother, not the hardened mafia boss. A fleeting, dangerous hope had sparked within her. Perhaps, just perhaps, they could forge a real future beyond the confines of his dangerous world. That fragile hope was shattered with the force of a hammer blow. It began subtly, an insidious whisper that gnawed at her newfound peace. A message discreetly slipped under her studio door late one night, a crude, untraceable note on cheap paper. Your father died for his secrets. Dante has more. Ask him about the broker. The word broker sent a cold shiver down her spine. It had been mentioned in the overheard conversation at the auction, the one that had drawn Dante's attention to her. It spoke of a higher tier of villainy, a shadow above even Silas Thorne. Alara felt a prickle of alarm, but pushed it away. Dante had been so open, so vulnerable about Isabella. He wouldn't betray her. But then came the call. Her mother's voice, frantic and choked with tears, echoing through the secure line Dante had provided. Alara, it's Silas Thorne. He's found a loophole, something about a clause in your father's old contracts. He's threatening to expose us, to ruin the gallery and your father's name, unless you meet him. Alone. At the old abandoned warehouse by the docks. Tonight, Alara's blood ran cold. Thorne. He was supposed to be ruined, his empire crumbling. Dante had assured her. A cold dread seeped into her bones. Was it possible Thorne had found a way back? Or was this a desperate, final gambit? She knew it was a trap, a blindingly obvious lure. But her father's name, her mother's peace, these were weapons Thorne knew she couldn't ignore. She had to go. She rushed to Dante's office, her heart a frantic drumbeat against her ribs. He was not there. His guards, usually omnipresent, seemed to have vanished, or perhaps they were merely more discreet than usual. A chilling silence permeated the penthouse, a vacuum where his commanding presence usually resided. She called his private line. No answer. Panic, cold and sharp, began to claw at her throat. Had he known? Was this part of his plan, another game she was unknowingly playing? The note, the urgency of her mother's call, the convenient absence of Dante, a sinister pattern began to emerge. Driven by a desperate maternal fear for her family's legacy, Alara slipped out of the penthouse, using a seldom-used service exit she discovered during one of her restless, confined explorations. The biting night air of Manhattan hit her like a physical blow, a stark contrast to the climate-controlled luxury she'd grown accustomed to. She hailed a battered taxi, giving the driver the address of the old warehouse by the docks. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to turn back, to find Dante, to confess. But the insidious whisper of the note, the fear that Dante's own secrets might be darker than she imagined, held her captive. The warehouse district was a forgotten corner of the city, a desolate labyrinth of rusting metal and crumbling brick. The taxi dropped her off blocks away, the driver nervously glancing at the darkened streets. The air here was thick with the stench of stagnant water, decaying wood, and an undefinable fear. Her boots crunched on broken glass and gravel as she walked, the sounds echoing eerily in the oppressive silence. Moonlight, fractured by the skeletal silhouettes of cranes, cast long, distorted shadows that seemed to writhe with hidden threats. She found the specified warehouse a monolithic structure, its windows boarded up, its huge metal doors sagging on rusted hinges. A single, weak light pulsed from within. Her heart hammered, a frantic drum against her ribs. This was it, the trap. Stepping inside, the air was cold, damp, and smelled of decay and fear. The vast space was largely empty, save for stacks of warped crates and the skeletal remains of forgotten machinery. The dim light source was a bare bulb hanging precariously from a frayed wire, illuminating a single battered chair in the center of the concrete floor. And in that chair, bound and gagged, was not her mother, but a terrified Mr. Henderson, his eyes wide with a desperate, silent plea for help. Alara, 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 a smooth, oily voice slithered from the shadows. Silas Thorne emerged, his face the smug, triumphant sneer. He was flanked by two burly men, their faces brutal, their eyes cold. Did you really think I'd be so cliché as to snatch your dear old mother? No, the old man here was far more informative. Alara felt a sickening lurch in her stomach. You won't get away with this, Thorne, she spat, her voice trembling but defiant. Dante will find you. Thorne threw back his head and laughed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed through the empty warehouse. Dante? Oh, sweet girl. Did you truly believe that monster was your savior? Did you believe his promises? He took a step closer, his eyes glinting with malicious pleasure. Dante Volkov doesn't save anyone. He uses them. You, your gallery, your family's fragile legacy. They were all just pawns in his relentless game against me. And against the broker. The word broker echoed in her mind, chilling her to the bone. The note. The truth, or a twisted version of it, began to coalesce into a horrifying picture. Your father, Thorne continued, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. He was trying to make things right. Trying to escape the web Dante wove. He was going to expose him. That's why he was taken out. Not by some random illness, Alara, but by the consequences of associating with men like Dante. And the broker, he has a very long memory. Alara stumbled back, a scream caught in her throat. Her father. Donna. The pieces of the puzzle, twisted and grotesque, clicked into place. The missing details about her father's death. The inexplicable deaths. The sudden desperate calls from her mother that had conveniently lured her here. Dante hadn't saved her. He had orchestrated her entanglement. He had exploited her vulnerability, her love for her family, to lure her into his dark world, perhaps to use her as bait for a larger, more sinister game against Thorne or this mysterious broker. The very man she had begun to trust, the man whose hidden pain she had seen, was a liar, a manipulator. He claimed me as his. But for what? To break me. To use me as leverage in his unending wars. The thought was a dagger to her heart, shattering every fragile hope she had dared to cultivate. He didn't tell you, did he? Thorne gloated, relishing her despair. That your father worked for Dante's rival, feeding them intel? That his illness was a convenient cover for his disappearance when he tried to betray the broker? Dante buried that truth because he needed you. Needed your gallery. Needed your innocence for his grand scheme. Alara's knees buckled. Betrayal. It was a cold, absolute realization. The empathy she had felt for Dante, the fragile connection they had built over Isabella's portrait, now felt like a cruel mockery. He had known her pain, her story, and had twisted it to his own ruthless ends. She was a pawn, a plaything in a world she could never comprehend, abandoned to the very monsters he had promised to protect her from. Mr. Henderson whimpered from the chair, his bound form trembling. He was an innocent, caught in the crossfire of a war Alara now understood was far older, far deeper than she could have imagined. And she, in her blind desperation, had led them both into the abyss. Thorne's men grabbed her, their rough hands seizing her arms, dragging her towards a dark corner of the warehouse where a rusty cage, meant for animals, stood ominously. She struggled, her screams muffled by a hand clapped over her mouth. Her fight was futile, her strength gone, drained by the crushing weight of Dante's betrayal. As they forced her into the rusted cage, the metal grating against her skin, the darkness enveloped her. The raw stench of decay, the echoing drip of water, the profound cold that permeated her very soul. She was alone. Utterly, irrevocably alone. Her golden cage in Dante's penthouse had been a lie. This filthy iron trap was her true reality. Hope, that fragile, flickering flame, was extinguished, replaced by the bitter ashes of abandonment and the chilling certainty that she had nowhere left to run. The heavy metal door clanged shut, its sound echoing like the final judgment in a cavernous, desolate warehouse. The darkness swallowed her whole, leaving her to face the terrifying truth. Dante Volkov hadn't saved her. He had simply delivered her to her doom. The silence in Dante Volkov's penthouse had never felt so vast, so utterly wrong. He stood in Alera's studio, the gentle scent of turpentine and oil paints, usually a soothing balm, now a torment. The Isabella portrait, freshly restored, gleamed with tragic beauty on its easel. He had come to check on Alera, drawn by an instinct that had sharpened to a razor's edge since she joined his world. But she wasn't here. Her secure phone lay on her desk, forgotten. The window, usually a source of inspiration, now felt like an open wound. Costas appeared, a grim shadow in the doorway. "Mr. Volkov." We intercepted a panicked call from Mrs. Vance. Alera, she received a message about her father and Silas Thorne. She went to the abandoned warehouse district by the old docks. Alone, a tremor primal and devastating ripped through Dante. His blood, usually cold and controlled, ignited into a searing inferno. Thorne. The name tasted like ash and bitter fury. He had thought he'd cripple the man, bled him dry. But Thorne, like a tenacious cockroach, had found a way to crawl back and to use Alera, his little bird, as bait. And the mention of her father, of old secrets, a cold, dreadful certainty settled in his gut. He knew what Thorne would have told her. He knew the seeds of doubt, of betrayal, Thorne would have planted. His rage wasn't a wild, uncontrolled explosion. It was colder, more dangerous. It was the calculated fury of a predator whose most prized possession had been snatched. His movements were swift, precise, devoid of wasted motion. Mobilize every man, every resource. Sweep the entire district. Find her. His voice was a low growl, each word laced with lethal intent. And when you find Thorne, bring him to me. Alive, but not intact. Within minutes, the penthouse, usually a bastion of quiet power, erupted with controlled chaos. Phones barked orders in Italian. Men in dark suits, their faces grim, moved with practiced efficiency. A fleet of black SUVs, engines rumbling like caged beasts, materialized on the street below. Dante, a dark storm cloud in the center of it all, grabbed a suppressed Beretta from his hidden safe, its cold steel a familiar weight in his hand. He hadn't personally led a raid in years, preferring to orchestrate from the shadows. But this was different. This was his. "Get me eyes on every entrance, every exit," he commanded Costas, his voice a chilling calm. "I want a perimeter. No one in, no one out without my direct order." And if anyone lays a hand on her, he didn't finish the sentence, but the unspoken threat hung heavy in the air, a promise of absolute, unholy retribution. The convoy tore through the night, a silent, deadly serpent winding through the city streets. Dante sat in the lead SUV, his gaze fixed on the GPS tracking the quadrant. His mind raced, calculating, anticipating. Thorne wasn't just after revenge. He was playing a deeper game, likely for the broker. He knew Alera was key, a pawn in a larger war. But Thorne had made a fatal miscalculation. He had touched what was Dante's. The warehouse district loomed ahead, a desolate landscape of shadowed hulks and skeletal cranes. The air grew heavy, thick with a metallic scent of rust and stagnant water. Target acquired, a voice crackled over the comms. Warehouse 7B. Single dim light visible. Dante's jaw clenched. Move in. Silent. Establish positions. I want this contained. The SUVs fanned out, their tinted windows reflecting the bleak moonlight. Men moved like ghosts, fanning out, securing the perimeter. Dante stepped out, the chill night air doing little to cool the fire in his veins. The Beretta felt heavy, yet perfectly balanced in his hand. His gaze swept the derelict exterior of Warehouse 7B, his senses heightened, every shadow a potential threat, every creak of metal a warning. Inside, Alera huddled in the rusty cage, the cold seeping into her bones, mingling with the even deeper chill of Dante's perceived betrayal. Mr. Henderson, whimpering softly in the corner, was a constant reminder of her failure. Thorne's taunts echoed in her mind, "Your father." Dante buried that truth. He needed you for his grand scheme. The raw despair threatened to consume her. She was nothing but a tool, a means to an end. Then a faint sound. Not the heavy, clumsy footsteps of Thorne's thugs. This was different. More precise. A soft thump from the roof, then another. Alara's head snapped up, a desperate, fragile spark of something. Not hope, but a primal, instinctual awareness, flickering in the vast darkness of her hopelessness. A sudden sharp crack ripped through the silence. Not gunfire, but the precise snap of wood. Then a muffled grunt. One of Thorne's guards, positioned near the main entrance, crumpled without a sound. Alara's breath hitched. This wasn't Thorne's sloppy work. This was professionalism. This was... The heavy metal door, which had seemed so impenetrable, suddenly shuddered. A low, powerful thud echoed through the cavernous space, and the rusted hinges groaned. A sliver of moonlight pierced the darkness as the door was forced inward, just enough for a single, imposing silhouette to appear, framed against the desolate night. Dawn. He stepped inside, a dark, avenging angel, his presence instantly dominating the vast space. The single dim bulb overhead seemed to flicker in submission. His eyes, now twin points of molten sapphire, swept across the warehouse, taking in the scene. The battered Mr. Henderson, the smug, triumphant Silas Thorne, and finally Alara, cowering in the rusted cage. The sight of her, trapped, vulnerable, broken, ignited the last vestiges of his control. His jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his cheek. His voice, when he spoke, was a low, lethal growl that seemed to vibrate through the very concrete beneath their feet. "Thorne," he enunciated. Each syllable a shard of ice. "You touched what is mine." Silas Thorne, initially startled, quickly recovered, a sneer twisting his lips. "Volkov, the ghost returns. You're too late. She knows. She knows all about her father, about your games. She knows you used her." He gestured wildly towards Alara in the cage. "And now she's mine. Bait for the broker. Your world is crumbling, old man. You're finished." Alara watched, a desperate, conflicting swirl of emotions raging within her. Relief, so potent it made her dizzy, that he was here. But also the bitter taste of Thorne's words, the echo of betrayal. She wanted to believe him, wanted to scream for him to save her, but the doubt, the devastating possibility of his deceit, held her silent, paralyzed. Dante didn't even glance at Alara. His gaze, cold and unwavering, remained fixed on Thorne, a promise of impending doom. "You misunderstand, Thorne. My world is not crumbling. It is merely being cleansed." And she, his gaze finally flickered to Alara, a possessive fire blazing in its depths, is not bait. She is the reason. With a sudden, violent surge of motion, Dante raised his beretta, not at Thorne, but at the padlock securing Alara's cage. Crack. The shot reverberated through the warehouse, deafening. Sparks flew as the thick metal shackle exploded, sending fragments showering across the floor. The cage door swung open with a rusty groan. "Get Mr. Henderson out." Dante barked over his shoulder, a silent signal to Costas, who had appeared like a wraith from the shadows with two other men. They moved to release the old man. Thorne, momentarily stunned by the sudden, decisive action, shrieked, "Kill him. Kill them both." His men, hitherto silent, drew their weapons, ugly, glinting blades and crude firearms. But Dante was already in motion. He didn't fight with flashy theatrics. He fought with brutal, efficient grace. The beretta spat fire twice, precise and deadly. Two of Thorne's men crumpled, silent puppets whose strings had been cut. The third lunged with a rusted pipe, but Dante moved like a shadow, a blur of dark tailored fabric. A swift, bone-jarring blow to the man's temple, and he dropped like a stone. Alara scrambled out of the cage, her legs weak, trembling. Her eyes, wide with primal fear and a dawning, terrifying awe, were fixed on Dante. He was a force of nature, a beautiful, terrifying storm of retribution. This wasn't just a rescue. It was a brutal, absolute reclaiming. Dante advanced on Thorne, his footsteps echoing ominously in the sudden, ringing silence. Thorne stumbled back, fear finally clouding his arrogant features. You're insane. You can't just... You can't do this. Dante stopped inches from him, his voice a low, chilling whisper. You spoke of secrets, Thorn. Of betrayal. Of a broker. He grabbed Thorn by the lapels of his expensive, now sweat-stained suit, lifting him off his feet with startling ease. The Beretta was pressed against Thorn's temple, its cold metal a stark, undeniable threat. Tell me everything. Who is the broker? And who else conspired to lay a hand on my Alara? His eyes burned with an unholy light, a terrible, magnificent fusion of love and possessiveness. This isn't just about saving her, Thorn. This is about making you understand that you have committed an unforgivable sin. You threaten what is mine, and now you will pay. Every single debt. Thorn whimpered, fear finally breaking his composure. He's everywhere, Volkov. A shadow. You can't fight him. I will burn down every shadow until I find him, Dante promised, his voice devoid of a single tremor. But first, you. He slammed Thorn against a rusted pillar, the impact echoing with a dull thud. Tell me everything. Alara watched, paralyzed, as Dante began to extract information with a quiet, brutal efficiency that made her stomach churn. Her fear was immense, but so was the overwhelming relief, the intoxicating sense of being utterly, completely protected. He hadn't abandoned her. He hadn't betrayed her. He had come for her. And he would raise worlds to ensure her safety. In that moment, watching the terrifying, magnificent man fight for her, Alara realized the full, terrifying truth. She was irrevocably his. And a part of her deep and primal had never felt so utterly, terrifyingly alive. A sudden sharp glare of headlights sliced through the distant shadows, accompanied by the faint, eerie wail of sirens. External forces. Not Dante's men. He had limited time. He needed to finish this. The broker, his network is tied to Senator Hayes. Thorn gasped, blood trickling from his lip. He controls the art market, the shipping lanes. He's the one who wanted your sister's collection. He's too powerful. Dante's eyes hardened, a new cold fury replacing the immediate rage. Senator Hayes. A name whispered in high circles. Too legitimate, too protected. A far greater enemy than Thorn. He pulled Thorn away from the pillar, his grip like iron. Take him. Dante barked to Costas, his voice a low, dangerous command. Make him talk. Every name, every detail. Then dispose of him. Quietly, Costas nodded, a silent promise of gruesome efficiency. Dante turned to Alara, his eyes softening, a stark contrast to the ruthless storm that had just raged within them. He reached for her, his hand, surprisingly gentle, touching her cheek. Alara, he murmured, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized was falling. Are you harmed? She shook her head, unable to speak, her gaze fixed on him. The sirens grew louder, closer. We need to move, he said, his voice urgent. Now. He didn't release her hand, but pulled her close, shielding her with his body as they moved towards a discreet exit, leaving behind the shattered remnants of Thorn's ambition and the chilling evidence of Dante's unleashed fury. The world outside, the world of law and order, was closing in. But Dante Volkov had just made his declaration. Alara Vance was his, and no force on earth would take her from him. The black SUV was a silent, opulent cocoon, slicing through the remaining darkness of the city. Alara, still trembling, leaned against Dante, his arm a solid, unyielding anchor around her. The scent of gunpowder and the raw metallic tang of fear clung to her, a chilling reminder of the abyss she had just escaped. The warehouse, now a fading nightmare in her rear view, was already being cleaned by Costas and his men, a silent testament to Dante's absolute control. She was vaguely aware of being lifted, carried, through hushed corridors, the plush carpet soft beneath her numb feet. Not the penthouse. This was a different sanctuary, a safe house he had obviously prepared. It smelled of old wood, beeswax, and a faint, comforting hint of lavender. He deposited her gently onto a vast, ridiculously soft bed, its sheets of cool, crisp linen. Her body ached, a symphony of bruises and protesting muscles from the rusted cage and the desperate struggle. A sharp, searing pain pulsed in her left arm, a superficial graze from a ricocheting bullet, a grim souvenir. But the deepest wounds were not physical. They were etched onto her soul, the chilling echoes of Thorn's accusations about her father, about Dante's perceived betrayal. The terror had faded, replaced by a profound, exhausting confusion. Had he saved her, or had he merely reclaimed what he viewed as his? Dante moved with a quiet efficiency that both soothed and unnerved her. He returned moments later with a pristine first aid kit and a steaming mug. His movements were precise, his face devoid of the raw fury that had consumed him in the warehouse, yet a fierce protectiveness radiated from him, an almost palpable heat. "Drink this," he commanded softly, holding the mug to her lips. The sweet herbal aroma of chamomile filled her senses, a stark contrast to the metallic tang of fear. She sipped, her trembling hands unable to hold the cup steady. The warmth spread through her, a fragile comfort against the internal cold. He sat beside her on the edge of the bed, his weight causing the mattress to dip slightly. His touch was surprisingly gentle as he examined her grazed arm, his fingers cool against her feverish skin. He cleaned the wound with meticulous care, his gaze fixed, unwavering. "A scratch," he murmured, his voice a low rumble. "You were lucky, lucky," Elara whispered, the word tasting like ash. "Thorn said, he said you used me. Used my father. That you knew everything." Her voice broke, the accusation, the fear, the desperate need for truth pouring out. "He said my father was betraying you, that his illness was a cover for his disappearance when he tried to betray the broker. That you buried the truth." Dante paused, his fingers stilling over her arm. He finally looked at her, his eyes, those piercing blue depths, softened, tinged with a regret she hadn't thought him capable of. "Thorn is a viper," he said, his voice quiet, raw. "He twists truth for his own gain. But not every word was a lie. Your father, he was caught between two worlds, mine and a more legitimate one he desperately wanted to return to. He made choices, dangerous choices. And yes, he did communicate with certain factions. Not against me, not initially. He was trying to protect his family, to atone for past errors, to find a way out of the shadows for good. But in my world, Elara, even good intentions can be devastating." He hesitated, then continued, his gaze holding hers. "The broker, he's a shadow, a puppeteer. Your father was gathering intelligence, trying to expose the broker's network, to dismantle a system that had trapped him. He believed it was the only way to truly secure your future, to leave you a clean legacy. I didn't know the full extent of his plans until after his disappearance. I found fragmented files, encrypted messages. He wasn't betraying me, he was fighting for you." A single tear, cold and sharp, tracked a path down Elara's cheek. "He's dead, isn't he?" Dante's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his cheek. "Yes," he said, the word heavy with unspoken grief and a chilling sense of responsibility. "He was trying to fix what he broke. And he paid the ultimate price." The broker saw him as a loose end, a threat to his carefully constructed anonymity. "I couldn't save him, Elara. Not then. And I buried the truth because I knew the weight of it would crush you. I wanted to protect you from his burdens. I wanted you to have a chance at a clean life, free from the shadows." His eyes met hers, holding a plea, a profound weariness. "I didn't want you to carry his sins. They were mine and the broker's." The confession, raw and painful, washed over Elara. The betrayal she had felt began to recede, replaced by a devastating understanding. Dante hadn't used her father. He had tried to protect her from the fallout of his desperate choices. He had buried the truth, not out of malice, but from a twisted, dark form of care. The image of the Isabella portrait, damaged yet fiercely protected, flashed in her mind. He understood loss. He understood the desperate need to preserve what remained. He finished bandaging her arm, his touch still careful, tender. Then he simply sat beside her, a silent, comforting presence. The weight of his power, once suffocating, now felt like a formidable shield. The next few days blurred into a haze of healing and quiet intimacy. Elara remained in the safe house, a beautiful, isolated sanctuary overlooking a hidden cove. Dante surprisingly stayed with her. He didn't leave her side, or if he did, he was always back before she realized. He brought her rare books, her favorite herbal teas, even a small, unfinished canvas and a fresh set of paints. He oversaw her meals, ensured her comfort, his every action a testament to a fierce, almost possessive protectiveness that transcended their earlier dynamic. This wasn't a cold, calculated transaction anymore. This was a man caring for what? His property? His responsibility? Or something more profound? Elara found herself watching him, mesmerized. He was still the mafia boss. She saw it in the way his eyes constantly scanned the perimeter, in the low, terse phone calls he occasionally took, his voice a steel-edged whisper. But she also saw the man who brought her soup when she couldn't eat, who adjusted her pillow, who sat for hours in silence, just watching her work, a quiet reverence in his gaze. The tenderness was breathtaking, intoxicating, a stark contrast to the cold ruthlessness she knew he possessed. Then came the news of Thorn. Not from Dante directly, but from the hushed conversations of his men, filtered through the thick walls of the safe house. Silas Thorne's legitimate businesses had been audited into oblivion, his assets frozen, his name dragged through the mud with irrefutable evidence of fraud and money laundering, all expertly uncovered by anonymous sources. His illicit art collection, which he had prized above all else, was systematically dismantled, sold off to unknown buyers, piece by piece, leaving him with nothing. No public execution, no dramatic gunfight. Just a slow, agonizing, public evisceration. His world, his power, his very identity had been utterly destroyed. It was a chilling testament to Dante's unwavering, ruthless justice. All threats to Alara had been erased, meticulously, irrevocably. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues, Dante found Alara on the small balcony, gazing out at the tranquil cove. She felt a profound sense of peace she hadn't known in years. All the tangible threats were gone. Her gallery was safe. Her mother was safe. She was safe. But the freedom she'd yearned for was now inextricably bound to him. He stood beside her, his presence a warm, comforting weight. No more threats, he said, his voice low, his gaze fixed on the darkening horizon. No more shadows reaching for you. Thorn is finished. And the broker, he will learn. He will learn not to touch what is mine. Alara turned to him, her eyes searching his. And my father. Dante's jaw tightened. The broker's network is vast, but it is vulnerable. I will dismantle it, piece by piece. I will find every truth, every answer. For you, for Isabella. His time will come. His voice was a promise of vengeance, cold and unwavering. A fragile peace settled between them, heavy with unspoken emotions. She was secure, yes, more secure than she had ever been in her life. But the golden cage had been permanently sealed. Yet, looking at Dante, at the fierce protectiveness in his eyes, at the subtle tenderness he now allowed her to see, a dangerous thought sparked in her heart. Was it truly a cage, if the one who held the key was also the one who held her heart? Was it possible that this dark, dangerous man, who had claimed her with such brutal possessiveness, was truly her salvation? He turned, his intense gaze sweeping over her face. You are safe, Alara. Forever. You belong to me now, body and soul. Do you understand? Her breath hitched. The words, once terrifying, now held an intoxicating promise. The absolute certainty of his claim. She nodded slowly, a profound, undeniable acceptance blooming in her chest. Yes, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I understand. The truth resonated deep within her. She was no longer just an artist. She was his. And the thrilling, terrifying journey of their shared future, free from the ghosts of the past, was just beginning. Was Alara's journey a desperate trap or a fierce salvation? Perhaps. True healing often arrives cloaked in darkness, and the fiercest protection stems from the most dangerous hearts. Her fight for a crumbling legacy reminds us that past wounds don't define our worth, and even shattered souls can find fierce devotion. You deserve a love that claims your broken pieces and guards them fiercely. If this story ignited a spark of hope in your heart, let us know. Like this video, subscribe for more tales of obsessive love, and comment below, I'm claimed by hope.